Shalom, this is Shira Sherbow coming to you from Sfat, Israel, and I want to welcome you all to our Tour for the Nations Women's Gathering. I appreciate you all so much. I just thank you that you invited me to speak to you, and I love getting together with you, and who knew when we started doing this what the circumstances would be. But here we all are, we're used to meeting, and now we've added a Zoom room. So I want to invite you all to, it's 3 p.m. Eastern Time, that we're going to, basically right after this, we're going to meet, and we're just going to have a time that we can either talk about some of the things that I brought up today, if you have anything to add, if you have any questions. Right now we're kind of just winging it. We'd like for everybody to kind of, in the Zoom room, to introduce themselves maybe, if they want to, tell a little bit about themselves, or we can just go in and go into some deeper teachings of what's going on right now. I always say this is what's in the air, and that's what I love so much about the Torah, because it's so relevant for today, and we say this week after week. We always say what's going on in our Torah. It's not old. It's very relevant, and what's going on in our Torah is going on in the news. So it's just amazing to me. And we talked a little bit last week about how the Torah is a song, or the Torah is a poem. And I found out that there are no cuss words in the Torah. Just like you wouldn't read a poem and there wouldn't be any cuss words. So we titled this week's topic this week's title is kind of funny. We just said what the, because we're not allowed to say any cuss words. And in the Torah this week, it's talking a lot about being refined and self-control, both in our speech and in our eating, just in our walk. God already made the animals, right? And so when he made humans, he doesn't want us to act like the animals. So he's constantly trying to elevate us. He brings us out of Egypt. He says, I brought you out to elevate you. So we're always working on ourselves. We're always being refined. And so we see that in this week's Torah portion. But I was going to talk to you about 3 different things that are going on this week in our Torah portion that they don't seem related, but then we find out that they are. And I love the fact that I have all of this years and years and years of accumulated knowledge. King David said, I make the Torah my occupation all day long. So there are people that have devoted their lives to this Torah. Once it was given on Mount Sinai, like 3,500 years ago, ever since then, this wisdom has been passed down through the ages. And I love the fact that I worked so hard, I feel like my whole life, to look for the truth. And I know you have too. And we came to recover our lost inheritance. We come to recover and continue that conversation that was started on Mount Sinai. Here we are, we're still learning the Torah, and it's not old, and it's very relevant. And so I always say this is what's been in the air this week. This is what's going on in the Torah. And of course, in the Torah, this week there was death, and then there was laws about impurity and contamination, and that's kind of still going on in the next few weeks. But we also see in our Torah that God is good and everything comes from God. And so when something is evil, in the end, we see that it's just kind of an illusion. The evil is there because we have to have free choice. So we have to, be able to choose good and evil. But in the end, it's always the things that appear to be evil that really end up for our good, because that's the way it has to be. So even this coronavirus, we know in the end, it's going to do a work in us maybe that nothing else could. We don't know what good is going to come out of it, but we know that God is in control. And I love the fact that we see in our life very clearly that there's a season for everything, and there's a cycle for everything. There's life and there's death, and there's sowing and there's reaping, and even a woman has her cycle. And so we see these cycles, and so we know that this isn't forever. It's a season that we're in right now, and we're making the best of it. And I went to my first Zoom room birthday party, and I'm sure you guys are doing the same thing. We're having our classes in the Zoom room, and people are getting married in the Zoom room, having bar mitzvahs in the Zoom room. And so this is what we're doing right now. So I just, we just make lemonade from our lemons and try to see the good. So, okay, I was going to tell you about the 3 different stories, because it's not only what the Torah says, but we also have to look at the placement. We have to look when something is said, like what came before it and what came after it. And this is why I'm so thankful for the sages and for all the things that I can read, because I know on my own, when I used to pick up the book of Leviticus, I couldn't read it. I couldn't understand one thing that I was reading. And now I find out that it's the heart of the Torah. And it's the whole climax of everything from creation till the whole story with Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and then Moses, and then coming out of Egypt. And everything has been leading to what we're reading about now. And so I never would have gotten that myself. And I never would see these things that the sages point out. So I'm just going to share, I could read and read and read and read, and I can give it over to you in 15 or 20 minutes when I spent hours of reading. So I feel like that's my gift to you. So these 3 different things that happen in this week's Torah portion, listen for the similarities. You're going to see in each of these instances, you're going to see this connecting idea of self-control and being refined, and this connecting idea of humility. And so the first thing that happens is there's 2 conversations that happen in this week's Torah portion between the 2 brothers, between Moses and Aaron. The first time they speak, Moses speaks and Aaron is silent. The second conversation they have, it's reversed. Aaron speaks forcefully and Moses is silent. So I have this wonderful book. We actually have 2 copies of this book, and this is the worn out copy, so we got a new one. This one we used so much that it just kind of fell apart. But I love, it's called The Orchard of Delight by Avraham Trugman. And I've got to read to you what he says about these 2 conversations of the brothers and what we can learn in our conversations with each other, whether it's husband and wife, whether it's 2 sisters, 2 brothers, 2 friends. He says, there is an exceedingly subtle but beautiful lesson about when to speak and when to remain silent. That can be learned from the way Aaron forcefully but respectfully spoke to Moses, and how Moses heard and he approved. The lesson is especially powerful since this dialogue reverses the roles Moses and Aaron just played immediately after Aaron's 2 sons' deaths, when Moses spoke authoritatively and Aaron was silent. Okay? And so it says, when Solomon told us there's a time for this and a time for that, one of them was there's a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And only a truly wise person knows when to speak and when to remain silent. Okay? So this is one of the incidences that takes place in this week's Torah portion. It's showing us. Now, I just know that I would read this and I wouldn't glean this from it, but when it's pointed out to me, I see it. So there was 2 conversations between the brothers, and there was this give and take. There was a knowing when to be silent and when to speak. It says the 2 incidences just referred to also illustrate the tremendous respect that Moses and Aaron had for each other. Each brother could speak freely and even forcefully to the other when need be, yet at the same time each brother knew how to humbly accept the truth from the other when he was right. So we have a theme of keeping silent, knowing when to speak and knowing when to be silent. And this idea of having humility is also. Okay, so then we go from their conversations and that, and then God's talking about the food laws. And so we're seeing this connection, like, here's what you should eat and here's what you shouldn't eat. Okay, and so he's trying to refine us and get us elevated. And the way that we eat is important also. And so we're talking about what goes in our mouth and what comes out of our mouth. There's a lot of rules. If we're going to be these refined human beings, we have to have rules. We have to have boundaries and borders. And so the Hebrew word for God's laws or God's, I don't like the word law because it doesn't give it over is what's really going on. What's really going on is God is saying, I want to connect with you. And I'm going to give you these connections. So a mitzvot is a way to connect with God. He goes, if you do things the way I tell you to do them, we become one. We become connected. And so it's kind of like, follow my instructions, because that's what we signed up to do. As God's people, we said, you're the king. Your will be done. You know, I learned that prayer as a little girl, on earth as it is in heaven. We're saying, your will be done, but we're submitting, so that's humility. We're saying, I want what you want, right? I'm accepting that yoke. I'm taking on doing things your way, like the powerful racehorse that takes on the yoke of the jockey. Okay, I know if I'm going to reach my potential, if I'm going to win the race, I'm going to be this humble. I can be strong and I can be powerful, but I need to be yoked up to God. And so God's saying, okay, then I'm going to give you my instructions. I'm going to show you how to win this race. I'm going to show you how you and I become one. So a mitzvot, the like 99.8% of the world has the 7 mitzvot, the 7 categories of mitzvot, or the 7 categories of instructions of how to connect with God. Okay, and so he's always trying to get us to a place, like if I was talking to my grandkids about eating, this is the kind of conversations we would have, like, well, let's wash our hands. Animals don't wash their hands, but we are human beings. We wash our hands. Let's sit at the table. Animals don't sit at the table, but we are human beings, so we sit at the table. Okay, and I learned when I got here to Israel, I was walking home in the middle of the night with a friend, and I was anxious to get home, and when we left the party, she had grabbed some cookies, and she told me, I have to stop and eat these. I can't eat while I'm walking. And I said, why can't you eat when you're walking? And she was the one that first told me that's how animals do that, but we're humans. And so I've learned for the first time that, and I started noticing after that, you know, like you don't see people walking around eating, like people are always sitting at a table. And I started, and we really don't have drive-through windows here. Like you don't see people eating in their car either. So it's a very big thing to sit at the table and eat. And also when you bless or you thank God for the food, animals don't know how to thank God for the food. Okay, so there's so many things that we do to refine the way that we eat. And the Jews were given all of the kosher laws that non-Jews don't have to keep, but you can choose to keep them. And so, but I think we're all given these, God wants us all to act refined and all to act like human beings and not like animals. And so when you think about the way that we eat, the way that we thank God for the food, and the way that we sit at the table, and the way that we wash our hands, and just the whole mindfulness of this thing is He's giving us all these laws and all these boundaries, all these what we call mitzvot, so that we can be refined. So we have in this Torah portion, we have the two conversations between the brothers, and each one has their time that they speak and has their time that they're silent. So that teaches us about the give and take in a good relationship. Okay, and it goes, like I said, it's not only what is said, but where it's said. So we see that there's a connection between, and it's really not apparent, like what does this have to do with, now we're going to talk about the food laws. But it's the same thing. We're talking about a way to do things in a refined way. And what we learned, it says that is stated in our Midrash, that's our Oratorah, that one of the reasons that God permits us to eat certain animals and forbids us to eat others, it's in order to refine us. And the basic refinement affected by observing his laws is the self-control that we gain when we submit to limitations on what we may eat, okay? And we do things simply because God said so, whether it makes sense to us or not. God is establishing, like, he wants a relationship with us. And if we say, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we are making you the king, and we want to do what you want us to do because you say so. That's how we become refined, and that's how we become connected to him. Okay, so then we have this third thing that happens in the Torah portion. And Aaron has two sons, and they bring something that's called strange fire. And they die. And so we find out that, the Torah portion's name is Shmini, which means 8, which 8 is always a number for supernatural. And so they very much were into the supernatural. They very much wanted to connect with the divine. So they thought that it was okay to bring a strange fire. And when you bring a strange fire, it's out of the realm of the boundaries that God said, do it like this, and do it like this, and do it like this, and do it like this. And we say, okay, you're the boss. And so they messed up. They brought a strange fire, and they paid with their life. And so we have to go back, way back to this other Torah portion. And you probably remember the story of Jacob's dream. And there's this ladder. And there's this thing called run and return. Okay, like the ladder symbolizes heaven and earth coming together, and this run and return, the angels going up and down. And so when we say we're bringing heaven down to earth, and we're doing earthly physical things in an elevated way, so the two worlds become connected. So where Aaron's sons, they just went up. They just wanted to go up, but God's wanting to come down. So we have this idea of run and return. Like it's not just about going to heaven. It's not just about doing heavenly things. It's about doing on earth, doing everyday earthly things, like eating, like speaking, but we do it the way we don't gossip. We know when to be silent. We are humble. You know what I mean? So we do all our speaking and all our eating in this refined way, where we're doing on earth as it is in heaven, refined or elevated, however you want to say, but that's how we become closer to God, and that's how we do what he wants us to do. We do it with lots of boundaries, lots of following instructions. That's a mitzvot, is an instruction. So they had this idea to bring their own idea to God and give it to him, and he He just took them all, and so we have these three incidences. We have where Moses and Aaron have these two conversations. We have the food laws, and we have the story of Aaron's two sons that bring the strange fire. So what do they all have in common? They all have in common that we need to have humility, that we need to follow the laws, follow the rules, follow God's ways, and He wants us to be refined. He wants us to do what He wants us to do the way He wants us to do it. And so there was one other thing that I wanted to say also, because sometimes it seems like we're told to do like two totally opposite things. Like you read in the Psalms that God loves a broken heart. But then we also know, or God is close to the brokenhearted, however it says. And then we also know that it's a mitzvah to bring joy to others. We know we're always supposed to be in joy. So how does that work? We sometimes, we read God is close to the brokenhearted. But then we also know a seemingly opposite thing, that, if we go around brokenhearted and depressed, it's not good for our immune system. And we know that it's healthier, it's a lot better, and it's the greatest mitzvot to make others joyful and to bring joy to others. So how do those two seemingly opposite things work together? And this happens a lot. And it's called like a paradox. Two seemingly opposite things, but they work. And so we can have a time. It used to be that, like, you can have a time that you're, maybe you need a whole day to be sad. Maybe you need 10 minutes to be sad. And so you have a designated amount of time that you give yourself to have this broken heart. But overall, we're supposed to be joyful. Okay, so we have to, and just like with speaking, like maybe there's things that we really want to say, but then we know they're probably better left unsaid. So how do we deal with that? Because it's like, I know for me, it's always nice to have that one friend that you can say, like I would just write out if I was angry. You just probably had a teenager, and I would just write it out. But it would be things that I was angry about. But of course, I knew that you can't just say everything, right? And so I would write it all out, and I had a friend, a very trusted friend, and I would say, read this and tell me, the 6-page letter that I just wrote it all out. And I say, what in this letter do I need to say, and what is better left unsaid? And by the time she got done, she's going, you don't need to say that. No, you don't need to. I would have like a 1-page letter. And what's really, one of the worst things that happens now in a text is, somebody was telling me that whenever they were upset and they would just start texting, and they would just get it all out, and then they would always press delete. And they say, like, this is what I want to say, but I'm not going to. And one time he accidentally, instead of pressing delete, pressed send, and got in a lot of trouble with his wife. But it used to be back in the day, like you could write a letter, and then by the time you got an envelope and you got a stamp and you had time to sleep on it, chances are you would wake up the next day and you go like, I probably shouldn't send that letter. You had time to think about it. And so that's one of the things that we just really need to have this self-control over what we say, really think about it, And I also heard this story of a guy that was in college, and the college professor, if you turned in a paper and you used an exclamation, he would say, the exclamation is a crutch. Rewrite your sentence so that the reader knows that it's an exclamation without you having to use the exclamation. So he didn't want them to write any papers using exclamations. They just had to use powerful, forceful words. And I noticed that when you read the Torah, there's no exclamations. There's not even really any periods or commas. It's just all like it's just all red. Sometimes there's a semicolon, I think. But anyway, so we don't always need to say everything. We need to rein it in and know when to keep silent. And so I wanted to read this one last thing. It says, one of life's greatest challenges is how to contend with the constant run and return dynamic, doing on earth as it is in heaven. And especially how to balance what appears to be the highs and lows of our mood swings. So the Baal Shem Tov explained that in the verse, I shall place God before me at all times. The word meaning I shall place, shviti, also means I shall make equal. So everything with God is equal. Like we may call something bad and something good, but with God, it's all the same. He says, therefore, he explained in the verse to me, I will carve into my consciousness the message that I should accept everything that happens to me with equanimity, for all that happens to me at all times comes from God. So having adopted this approach to life, the very notions of up and down become less absolute, and the highs are not as high and the lows are not as low. We need not experience our mood swings as manic gyrations of the pendulum, nor do we need to experience our lows as very depressing. So anyways, I thought, there's always, I wanted to look ahead and see, like in next week's Torah portion, and we're going to see more of the same thing, like more talk about death and more talk about contamination and all of these seemingly bad things. But there's also this idea of kind of like a no pain, no gain thing. Like the woman, she gets the pains and the pains seem bad, but then she's going to have the baby. So it's kind of like things going on in the world, when we know they're from God, then we accept everything. We accept the pain. We accept what we have to go through, because we know that really in the end, when we go through stuff, it's not a punishment as much as it is God saying, I want you to wake up. I want you to think about, I want your attention right now. I want you to think about, I want you to have some insight into yourself and what you need to change. And so these things happen to, not really as a punishment, but to get us to change, to get us to think, to get us to reconnect, to get us to reach our full potential of what he wants us to be. And so we shouldn't look at things as bad, but as God's way of wanting our good. Okay, so our title was there's no cuss words in the Hebrew language, but I did come home one day and tell my husband, I think I heard a cuss word today in Hebrew. And I was standing at the bus stop trying to get to work, and there's something about the number 12 bus, this happened all the time, that it would be this little bus. Most of the buses are real big, but the bus I needed to get on was a little, and it seemed like everybody was waiting for the 12, and so many times it happened that the bus driver would be full up, and we would be waiting to get onto the number 12, and he would just kind of go by us and just wave like, sorry, wait for the next one, which is like another 20 minutes. And so when the bus, you're waiting and waiting for the bus. You finally see the bus, and he just kind of goes, oh, sorry, I'm full. Wait for the next. So, people at the bus stop, they were like, they said, real angry. They said, "Studio." And so I came home and I told my husband. I said, "I think I heard a cuss word in Hebrew today," and I told him what it was, and he said, "That just means nonsense." He says it's not really a cuss word because you can have positive nonsense. And I said, "When do you have positive nonsense?" And he goes, "Well, when you go to a wedding, and one of the things, if you ever go to a Jewish wedding, everybody takes their turns giving positive nonsense to the bride and groom. The men are over there doing their positive nonsense, and the women are over here doing our positive nonsense. And what you do is you just do these funny little, funny little dances or funny little, just you try to make her laugh. So it's called positive nonsense, studiot. What are you doing for the bride? Studiot. So it's not really, it's not really a cuss word. So anyway, we want to be refined. Like if I take my drink right now to elevate this, I say, I say a prayer over it. And it's, thank you, God, for creating everything by your word. And then I take, actually, I think I did that wrong because I'm not supposed to, as soon as I say the prayer, I'm supposed to take a drink. So still learning. Slowly. Okay, so looks like in about a half hour, we're going to be in the Zoom room, and I can tell you a little bit about what's in the air for next week. And it's funny because we have a Hebrew calendar, and right now we're in the first month of the calendar, and this is the month that we get taken out of Egypt, and the month that we have our Passover, and we have a few more days. And on Friday, this coming Friday, we're starting our second month, and each month has like energies, and so there's like different things in the air. And so in the month of Nisan, it's each month is a tribe. It's the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. And it's the month where we're talking about humility, and we're talking about speaking and knowing when to speak and when to keep silent, and going from a state of humiliation, like the humiliation of being enslaved in Egypt, and whatever we have that's our Egypt, whether it's some kind of habit we can't break, some addiction, whatever enslaves us, it humiliates us to a point like we're not going to reach our potential because this thing is enslaving us. And so they were freed, and they were freed during this month from humiliation to a place of humility. Now, humility is good. Humiliation is negative. Okay, so but when they got to a place of humility, what we did this past week, a few days ago, was this called the Song at the Sea, when we say, "Thank you, God, for saving us." And we saw Pharaoh's army was drowned in the sea. We got through to the other side, and it's not a time for gloating over the enemies, because what did we do? We were a bunch of slaves with no weapons. We surely didn't do this, and it's nothing to be happy about that all these people are dead. But it's a place of humility, of saying, "Thank you, God, for saving us. Thank you that they didn't get us and take us back to our humiliation." That we're free, and actually we're free to have a bunch of rules. Now we're going to be free to have a bunch of rules and a bunch of constrictions, and God's going to tell us what we can do and not do. So it's a different kind of freedom, but we chose that. It was our free choice to say, we will do whatever you tell us to do. We are choosing to do your will. So we're kind of choosing to give up our free will to make our will and your will one. Your will be done. See? So that's all in the air this month. And so we start our second month next week, and so we can talk about what's coming up and what we're doing. And I love it. I love that we have this Torah that is so relevant, that is so alive and well to what is going on in the news and what we need for our everyday life and how we can be refined human beings and how we can connect to God. And, I just remember so many times people saying, well, we're not under the law. We're not under the law. And you would never say that you didn't want to, I'm not under the instructions of God. I'm not under the way to connect to God. But that's the misinterpretation of what God's laws are really his mitzvot and his instructions and his way to refine us, his way to make us not like the animals. We would never say, oh, I want to be like the animals. I don't want to be a human being. But that's what's saying, if you say I'm not under the law, that's basically, you're saying I don't want his instructions. I don't want his connections. I don't want his mitzvot. I don't want to learn how to be refined. I don't want to learn how to be a human being instead of an animal. And we would never say that. And so it's just getting an education and choosing to learn from the peoples that were standing there at Mount Sinai and have passed these Torah and these mitzvot and these instructions down. They've preserved the Torah with their life, and so we still have it today. And so we can appreciate the Jewish worldview, or we can say it's old and we don't need it anymore. And so I'm thankful for every one of you who has just kind of come back to the Torah, has recovered our lost inheritance. We're learning how to be refined. We're learning how to connect with God, to do the mitzvot, and do everything he wants us to do, to be one with him. Okay. So I'm looking forward to seeing y'all in the Zoom room. And again next week, hopefully, if everything goes well. Okay, have a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Shalom from Israel.